Are we going to keep bickering over secondary issues, or are we going to keep the main thing the main thing?
Let's go, girls.
The curtain has closed on the Southern Baptist Convention in Anaheim, California, and yet the drama continues. Why? Because there were certain actors at the Southern Baptist Convention play that have delivered new lines that are causing some people to scratch their heads and wonder, do they have a case that they can make for the ordination of women in ministry? In my estimation, this is the big issue. The other issues that we thought would be broiling just didn't really, that were cooking. We just didn't see anything come about CRT, whether or not the denomination is going to be abolitionist or incrementalist regarding the life issue, financial accountability for NAM. None of those issues were really brought into the spotlight as much as the issue of role of women. Rick Warren stepped up to the microphone to deliver what he called a love letter to the Southern Baptist Convention and told the audience, the messengers gathered, hey, let's quit arguing over secondary issues.
Are we going to keep bickering over secondary issues, or are we going to keep the main thing the main thing?
One of which, in his opinion, is the ordination of women in ministry. Why? Because a year or so ago, he ordained 3 females as pastors at Saddleback Church. But the 2 arguments, 3, if you will, that were forwarded out of the Southern Baptist Convention are different than those of the Episcopalians. They started, the Episcopalians, late 19th century, they decided to sanction women deaconesses. And then there was a little bit of movement in the 20s and the 40s. It was 1974 in Philadelphia. 11 women marched into an Episcopalian church where they were ordained as women. 76, the councils got together, the convention took place, and it was sanctioned that women can be priests in the Episcopalian, which is a division of Anglicanism.
Marriage is what brings us together today.
1976. And since that time, we have seen women not only ordained as priests, but leading the entire denomination and ordained as bishops. How did it start with them? They used Galatians 3:28. They said, look, what Paul did there. He said there's no distinction between men and women. Therefore, with that knowledge in mind, we can apply it to the office of pastor. There's no distinction. It is a hideous hermeneutic. But I haven't heard out of any of the mainline Protestant denominations the arguments from the SBC. Friel, are you going to get to them ever? Number 1, title. There can be different types of pastors, and as long as a woman isn't the lead pastor, then it's okay for her to be a pastor. That's a bit of a new argument. The second argument that I heard was that there is a distinction between the office of pastor and the gift of pastoring. You see, Paul in Ephesians 4, maybe 1 Corinthians 14 too, he lists among the spiritual gifts available to the body that there are some who are preachers, some who are teachers. And those two are kind of linked together, but not entirely. Therefore, it is okay for a woman to be a preacher and teacher too, because it's in the list of spiritual gifts. Therefore, concluded Rick Warren, and it looked like the Credentials Committee, this is a secondary issue. Let's start unpacking these new arguments for the ordination of women in the church right there. Is this a secondary issue? The answer is, don't panic on me, but the answer is yes, it is a secondary issue.
Oh, come on!
And you immediately go, well, that means then that some can do it and others can't. Not so fast. There's more to the story. Secondary issues don't necessarily mean that we can still have unity. We can look at a secondary issue and make some conclusions about that particular belief that would cause us to say, no, the way that they deal with the Bible, the way that they deal with clear teachings in scriptures is so aberrant that we cannot have fellowship. Liberal folks would say it is just a secondary issue because it is not about the Christological theology that must be possessed for somebody to be Orthodox, Trinitarian theology, soteriology, the virgin birth. Those are cardinal doctrines. This is just the role of women in the church. It's a secondary issue. Just let's let girls be girls and do what they want to do because it's a secondary issue. Sometimes a secondary issue can be of a nature that while it is not indeed a cardinal doctrine, it reveals that the person who possesses that view has a twofold issue. Number one, because the teaching in Scripture could not be more clear that Paul, 1 Timothy 2, does not allow a woman to preach and have authority over men. That is just so definitive that their inability to see what is plain causes us to say, you don't know how to handle the Bible, or you have such a low view of the Bible, or you are playing such hermeneutical gymnastics with the Bible that this suddenly becomes an issue that we consider separation. Can you say it's heresy? No. But you could say it is a really low view of the Bible issue. And second, you could also say this is somebody who is willing to overlook the clear teaching of the Bible and let a congregation live in sin. Because if it is true that Paul said, and he did, I do not permit a woman to preach or have authority over men. If that's clear, if somebody's violating that by ordaining women, then they are sinning. That woman is sinning, the ordaining body is sinning, and the congregation is sinning because it's living in sin. So this might be something that you could offer to perhaps some Southern Baptists who are purpose-driven churches and going, well, if Rick Warren did it, I guess we can do it too. Ask them to deal with 1 Timothy 2. And encourage them to not be living in clear violation of a clear teaching of Scripture. This illustration may be helpful. If a congregation held the view that there are some Bible verses that indicate that adultery is okay, what would you think about that, church? You'd go, well, something's wrong here. Jesus listed adultery. But a moderate or liberal would argue, yes, he did warn against adultery, but he was actually speaking to men in that context, not women. Therefore, women can commit adultery. You'd go, hold the phone, Henrietta. First of all, your hermeneutic is horrific. Second of all, you are allowing and endorsing sin. That is a major problem with people like Rick Warren who are ordaining women as ministers. That church is in danger. That church is living in sin. That church also has such a low view of the Bible and such a poor ability to read what is plain and possessing a willingness to take the Bible and twist it into pretzel knots, saying, well, it's just a secondary issue because there's a distinction between the office and the gifting, and as long as there's a different title, it's okay. Well, it's not. There is a connection between preaching and teaching. And when somebody is preaching and teaching, they are exercising authority. If a woman stepped into the pulpit, opened up the Bible, and started preaching, she is exercising authority because that is what preaching is. It is an authoritative presentation and an authoritative office. Therefore, we see the spiritual gifts in Ephesians 4. We see 1 Timothy 2. They suggest, well, if we just slip an adjective in front of pastor, we're good to go. The problem with that argument is you just don't see that anywhere in the Bible. You would think, we know how contentious this issue is. Paul, under the inspiration of the Spirit, you would think that he'd bring some clarity and say, well, let me just be clear. All right, sir, you can be the lead pastor, but other women can be pastors of different branches. No, he didn't do that. Instead, he said there is an office. And if you do that activity, You are usurping that role. Now, furthermore, we need to take a look at some other Bible verses. 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1 would do the trick. Paul gives the credentials that a person must possess to hold the office of pastor. And it is written specifically, directly, emphatically, and clearly for males. And you can't override that. You can't say, well, okay, it says it there, but because Ephesians lists the gift of preaching, therefore, it doesn't matter what he said there. Yes, it does, because 1 Timothy 3 brings clarity to Ephesians 4, which lists preaching as a spiritual gift. Yes, it's a spiritual gift in the body that some possess. Paul, in another section of Scripture, this is the analogy of Scripture at work. He let Scripture interpret Scripture. He then, in a different book, unpacks that office of preaching. And he defines it for males. You harmonize the two and you come up with a historic position that men only are to occupy that particular office. That is why the presentation that is being put forward is a Bible issue. How do we handle this book? They're using it in a way it sounds kind of, yeah, I see what you're doing there. Let's just say I was credentialed as a tall person doctor. Not as a doctor. No. That's the guy who runs the clinic. I'm just a tall person doctor, and I just see tall person patients. What do I do with them? Well, everything a doctor does, but I don't run the office. You'd go, hold it. You're a little bit confused here. You can't just slap an adjective, perform the function, and say it's something other. And that's exactly what they are doing, which is why this issue we need to, and I suspect we will. We're going to get better and better. As you watch assaults on the church, any church, there's like this. Some people have been spending some time noodling a new liberal assault, and they can be somewhat clever. And you look at it and go, well, that kind of makes sense, which incidentally, that was the major argument that the Episcopalians used in the 20th century to ordain women. Had very little to do with Bible. They tried Galatians 3:28, but mostly they argued from logic and reason. Well, we're seeing women as senators. They can't be pastors? Well, that seems to make that they should. Hey, women, they have gifts. Yeah, no kidding. So wouldn't it just be great if we made them happy? Don't you want women to feel fulfilled? Yeah, Mott and Bailey. So let's just let women be pastors. Furthermore, it's going to help the local body because she brings something unique to the office, which I wouldn't argue women do bring something unique. Hence God's binary structure for civilization. Furthermore, they argued from logic and reason. This is a relevant issue. We are looking archaic, and we're not going to attract people. That was the thrust of their argument. I suspect over the next weeks and months, and it'll take a little time, but within a year, you are going to have an articulate rebuttal to these arguments. I can almost assure you, because of Rick Warren, and especially if the SBC, who has decided, well, we'll look into it a little further, boing, I don't know how confusing this issue is. If the SBC passes and says, this is rightly a secondary issue, therefore there's no reason for division, there's no reason for leaving, we can all have unity, which was the battle cry of the 2022 convention, it's going to make its way into your church. Guaranteed. Be ready. This is Wretched Radio.
Houston, I think we have a few problems here.
Go ahead, Wretched One.
Besides the fact I'm wearing a cardboard helmet, Houston, you have got one of the biggest false teachers in the universe. Are you kidding? He is so rich.
How rich is he, Wretched One?
I can see his house from here.